I just want to make it clear that if there are issues due to differing ways to resolve mechanics or mitigate damage, this guide isn't the be-all end-all. Always check your region's toolboxes and mitigation sheets to see who goes where and who tanks what. Before pulling, the group will assign Quickmarch positions that will be relevant for lots of the mechanics later. You will pick a spot on the waymarks and they will translate to left and right 1 through 4.
Twintania will start off with a few auto attacks and a plummet, a physical conal tank buster on the main thread dealing moderate damage. After this, Twintania will start casting Twister, which will place small tornadoes under 4 random players at the end of the cast bar. Players must move towards the end of the cast, as running into one of these tornadoes will result in instant death and kill any nearby players by knocking them into the death wall. A fireball will be dealt with tightly after this. This is a shared magical AoE targeting a random healer or DPS. This should be soaked by 5 players to help the LB gain for a later phase. The way limit break generation works in Stormblood and earlier is that it scales ridiculously with overkill damage. Any damage dealt past your current health pool adds significantly more limit gauge. This is hindered, however, by mitigation placed on the boss since it nerfs the outgoing damage. So we will use mitigation on the party to live with fewer people and push more damage past the threshold. This can also be achieved to great effect with all 8 players on low health, but with lots of mitigation to compensate. All this damage soaked by the mitigation will still register as overkill damage. To solve this, have the party spread out into set twister positions without intercepting each other's path towards Twintania. Wait for the Twister cast to almost be complete before moving in towards Twintania's hitbox to soak the stack. Both the tanks and one assigned healer should stay out of this stack for LB gen, the exception being if the assigned healer gets targeted by the marker, then the healer that we usually stack should stay out while the marked healer moves in. After resolving the stack, the main thread should prepare for a double tank buster combo consisting of Death Sentence, a single target buster which applies a slashing resistance down requiring a tank swap, then a plummet. This is where she starts looping her mechanics from the start until she drops below 75%. Include more player for future fireballs if you no longer need more limit break gauge. You might need another 6-person stack depending on kill time. If Twintania's HP has been pushed past 75% at this point, she will drop a Neuralink in the middle of her hitbox. These Neuralinks will drop 2 more times at 44 and 0%. They will also persist throughout the encounter, so the placement will be important as they play a role in future mechanics. Make sure Twintania drops them on A, B, and C. Upon dropping this Neuralink, Twintania should be pulled to B to resolve her next set of mechanics. If desired, the tank could pull Twintania between the 2 waymarks for melee uptime during her next mechanic, before pulling her all the way to B. Twintania will start her second round of mechanics with Liquid Hell, a 5-hit targeted AoE on a player beyond 15 yalms, which places a fire puddle under them. If there are multiple players outside that range, she will select any of those at random. If there are no players outside that range at all, she will select any player. Standing in this puddle will inflict the player with a lethal burn dot, and should the baiter die, it could result in random puddles on random players. To deal with the liquid hells, we will assign 1 ranged player as baiter, usually the physical ranged, and their job will be to bait the liquid hell puddles that are baitable throughout the encounter. This player should move out to 2 after Twintania has dropped her Neuralink on A to prepare for the baits, then rotate along the edge towards the 3 marker for the first 5 hits. Following the liquid hell is a generate cast, marking a random DPS player for hatch. This will release an orb from Twintania that will home in on the marked player and explode when it connects. It will also explode if it is intercepted by another player. Unless it is soaked in a Neuralink, this will wipe the raid. Upon resolving Generate correctly, the player will receive a debuff called Mana Hypersensitivity, preventing the player from soaking another hatch for a while. If the assigned baiter is targeted for hatch, you can have another ranged player intercept their orb. This can be done by having the baiter line up with Twintania so that the hatch will pass through the Neuralink and simply have the interceptor soak the hatch instead. The group can also opt to have a backup baiter instead. Twintania will now follow up with a second Liquid Hell. Remember that the hatch is an AoE and will kill you if you get hit by it. It is worth mentioning that the debuff required to soak the hatch will also inflict the player with a 90% damage down and a 15% heal reduction while they linger in the Neuralink. Following another set of baits, Twintania will again target the main threat for death sentence, forcing a swap before casting Generate once more. Every other Generate in each loop will be paired with a Twister, so make sure to drop it outside the Neuralink when soaking. If Twintania is not at 44% by the time Generate finishes casting, the group will have to deal with another set of Twisters, then a Plummet, before she repeats the scripted mechanics from the first Liquid Hell. For the third Neuralink, Twintania will be pulled slightly south off the middle while the baiter should prepare to bait another set of 5 Liquid Hell puddles. Right after this, Twintania will target 2 DPS for hatch. Immediately after that, pull Twintania to C and she will target a DPS or a healer with a fireball stack as well as a random player except the main thread for random Liquid Hell baits. First of all, it is recommended to have the party spread out a tiny bit to easier see who is being targeted by Twintania's random baits. Have the DPS soak their hatch while identifying who is being targeted, usually visualized by Twintania turning to said player to start spitting. This puddle should be baited away from Twintania's hitbox to create a safe spot for the fireball stack, which will be resolved on the hitbox facing towards the middle of the arena. Once the stack has been dealt with, there's another death sentence into Plummet, followed by another Generate on 2 DPS, Twisters, and finally a Plummet. If Twintania has been pushed to 0.1%, she will drop her final Neuralink and disappear. However, if she has not, she will start looping mechanics again from Liquid Hell. At 305, Twintania will cast her Enraged Etheric Perfusion, resulting in a raid wipe, so make sure to DPS her down before this.
The next phase will start with the Heavensfall tower dropping down in the middle, causing a knockback dealing proximity damage. The group will want to use C as a general stack position rather than the Neuralinks. Following this knockback, Nael will start targeting all players from Meteor Stream, small AoEs dealing moderate damage. This will happen in 2 sets of 4. Additionally, the players will have to dodge 2 sets of cone AoEs from the Heavensfall tower. To resolve this mechanic, simply have players spread out after the knockback to avoid overlapping meteor streams and then rotate clockwise into the cone AoE that just exploded. Do not step into the field in the middle since the blue barrier will kill you. Nael will enter the arena with a Dalamud Dive, a heavy-hitting AoE tank buster on the tank that last had aggro on Twintania. She will then follow this up with her Bahamut's Claw, a 5-hit physical tank buster on the main threat. Have the main threat use tank invulnerability for her dive and tank buster to simplify this combo. Nael will then cast Bahamut's Favor, giving Nael a damage up buff and also summons 5 dragons outside the arena. 2 players will be targeted for a Thunderstruck debuff. This debuff will release an AoE around the player that deals high damage and applies paralysis to any other players. Paralysis will periodically prevent the player from moving or taking actions. Nael will select 2 of her mechanics that she will cast consecutively based on an NPC dialogue in form of a quote. In this case, it can be either Lunar Dynamo into Iron Chariot or Lunar Dynamo into Thermionic Beam. Lunar Dynamo is a donut AoE around Nael that will heal her for every player it connects with. Iron Chariot is a point-blank AoE that sends everyone it hits into the death wall. To tell for this combination is to look for Iron for the quote. Regarding the second quote, Thermionic Beam is a party stack targeting a random player. The tell for this quote is Scorch. To deal with this, have 2 Thunder players spread out north of Nael while the party stacks behind her. Simply dodge outwards if it's Iron Chariot or stay stacked if it's Thermionic Beam. As the second part of the quote resolves, the dragons will have started tagging all players for Ice Bitten debuffs. These will kill the players if they get tagged again. One random player will be targeted by a fire tether. This will hit the player with a small fire AoE that deals low damage and either cleanses all Ice Bitten debuffs or applies a fire debuff if the player isn't Ice Bitten. Much like with Ice Bitten, the fire AoE will kill any player that already has the fire debuff. The dragons will tag all 8 players for Ice Bitten 3 times during the phase and send out 4 fire stacks. Just focus on resolving the fire correctly and you won't have to worry about it. If there are deaths, the ice will start killing off players as it always tags 8 players per sequence. 2 players will get selected for Doom debuffs with different durations, one with 6 seconds and one with 10. Finally, random players can be targeted by 2 consecutive light puddles that deal lethal damage. When the puddle resolves, it will also leave behind a patch of light that can cleanse a doom from a player. The party should move back to Nael's hitbox to soak the fire tether while moving clockwise around Nael to bait the random light puddles. Players marked for doom should pay attention to their debuff timers and move into the little puddle left by the light AoEs to cleanse their doom when it's their turn. Nael will finish her first rotation of mechanics with another Bahamut's Claw on the main threat. For the second combination of mechanics, the player targeted for the fire tether should move this out of the party and additionally watch their own debuff to avoid taking the third tether. If any players miss the first fire tether, they should stack with this one and pay close attention to their debuff. Another set of Thunderstruck debuffs will be distributed and should be taken away from the party to avoid cleaving anyone. Nael will then once again start her quote mechanic, this time starting with Thermionic Beam, which will either be followed by a Lunar Dynamo or an Iron Chariot. The tell for Iron Chariot is the word iron, and the word for Lunar Dynamo is moon. To deal with the upcoming quote combination, the Thunders should first move out to resolve their debuffs and then join the group behind Nael for the Thermionic Beam. Stay in for Lunar Dynamo or dodge away from Nael for Iron Chariot. The party should once again group on Nael's hitbox to bait the light puddles together and rotate clockwise around her, while the Doom debuff players will grab their cleansers. This time 3 players will be selected for Dooms, with the timers of 6, 10 and 16. The dragons will also prepare to tag 8 players again for Ice Bitten. Around the second cleanse, 2 players will once again be targeted by Thunder and should dodge away from the rotating party, while another fire tether appears. Make sure that the player who took the second fire tether does not stack with this one, as their fire debuff might persist. If a player has the last doom as well as the fire tether, resolve the tether in the party first before going to your doom. Now we'll once again finish this set of mechanics with a Bahamut's Claw on the main threat. Next mechanic will be another quote mechanic. It will either be a Raven's Dive into Lunar Dynamo or Raven's Dive into Iron Chariot. Raven's Dive is an attack from Nael where she lunges at a random target and deals low AoE damage, knocking any other player into the death wall. The tell is just like before, Iron for Iron Chariot and Moon for Lunar Dynamo. Have your party do a light spread in set positions according to Quickmarch positions to resolve the Raven Dive, then dodge in for Lunar Dynamo, or move away for Iron Chariot. After the quote resolves, the dragons will distribute 2 Thunderstruck debuffs, a Fire Tether and the final round of 3 Dooms, Ice Bitten and Light Puddles. It is worth noting that assuming no one dies, everyone will have to deal with each debuff once. Thunderstruck players should wait for the Fire Tether to disappear so that they ensure they get the fire before moving out to resolve their debuff. At the same time, the first light puddle appears to start the cleansing phase. Players should once again rotate clockwise around Nael to bait the puddles as before, while Doom players cleanse their debuffs. This means that the Thunderstruck players should never rotate clockwise nor counterclockwise with their debuff, instead aim to move straight out from Nael. Right after the final Doom has been cleansed, the main threat will be targeted by a Raven's Beak, a high damage tank buster applying a piercing vulnerability, forcing a tank swap before the final mechanic of the phase. The dragons around the arena will now prepare to dive bomb random players except the main threat. This is indicated by a green marker above the selected player's head, and the dive will lock in once the marker disappears. The dragons dive in sets of 2, 1 and 2, starting clockwise from true north, dealing damage in a line and knocking any players they hit back. You want to leave the middle of the arena safe. The dragons only appear on cardinals added to cardinals. To deal with this, what people used to do is manually check their assigned dives as they got their markers. For these patterns, the sequence would look something like this. The second bait should pay attention not to be in the path of the first dives. During these baits, Nael will throw out 2 hypernovas on the first dive bait, then another 2 on the second dive bait. These act much like the liquid hounds, as they are puddles that linger and kill anyone who steps in them. They will start going out when the first dive locks in, and stop when the second dive locks in. This means that it's technically only the second dive that needs to worry about them, and bait them in such a way where they don't cover their bait spot in death. PF has implemented a strategy where you can more often than not just use these markers. The first selected player can move to the D marker to bait their first hypernova, then proceed to rotate clockwise from it to bait the second one before moving back towards the middle. For the second dive bomb, the player initially wants to drop their first hypernova before the 2 marker and then rotate onto the way marker for their second bait. However, there is a chance that the dragon pattern does not allow this. 4 out of the 56 patterns render the 2 marker unsafe. This is any of the patterns where 4 of the dragons spawn from south to northwest. This means that the first dive will always cover the 2 marker. Simply adjust the 2 marker over to the west side of south. At the start of dives, Nael will do another quote. This will either be Meteor Stream on 4 players into Dalama Dive, or Dalama Dive into Thermionic Beam. The tell for the Meteor Stream pattern is Rain of Stars, and the tell for the stack is Scorch. If it's Thermionic Beam, have the group stack mid while the main threat stays away for the Dalama Dive. A healer can rescue the third bait back to the stack since it resolves right after the third dive locks in. However, if it's Meteor Stream, have everyone do a light spread away from the main threat to avoid getting hit by the incoming tank buster. The tank will always resolve the tank buster on 4, but make sure to move in a little when the first dive resolves to not drag and surf into the wall. The first bait returning to the centre can carefully move back out after the dragon dive to make more space in the middle. The south people should make sure there's space left for the second bait to move in. You can take advantage of the fact that Meteor Stream resolves before the third dive by spreading out on the northwest side of the arena. While D can be used for difficult patterns, I encourage you to adjust the first dive manually for the sake of players in the middle. I recommend placing the bait either east or southeast depending on the pattern. Upon finishing the quote mechanic, Nael will once again target the main threat for a Bahamut's Claw tank buster, and if she has not been pushed to 0.1%, she will do a couple of auto attacks before starting 2 rounds of quotes, another Raven's Beak, Bahamut's Claw, and finally a Mega Flare and Rage. Nael's phase ends with a flying off, and you once again need to position yourself for proximity damage and a knockback, but this time with a tank limit break to protect your party against the 7th Umbral era.
The 7th Umbral era will pulse 3 times before blowing up in a bigger raid-wide. To deal with the pulsing AoEs and final raid-wide, a tank limit break 2 or 3 is recommended, with extra heals and mitigation should it only be an LB2. Bahamut will start his phase with a Flare Breath, a conal AoE buster on the main threat, followed by the physical tank buster, Flatten. He will then start casting Quickmarch Trio, the first major mechanic of this phase, before disappearing. Bahamut, Twintania, and Nael will appear at a random side outside the arena and prepare to dive across in a straight line together. This will be our new north for the rest of the mechanic. Getting hit by the dive will deal massive damage and knock the player back. Due to the limited space on each side, we have the light party split off to the relative west and east using the Quickmarch positions assigned at the start. Right after the dive, a few of the players will be targeted for twisters, and you will need to move. However, do not move all the way to the middle yet, as Bahamut will release Mega Flare. Bahamut's version of Mega Flare will first target 4 random players for dodgeable puddles, followed by unavoidable AoEs on 4 random DPS or healers, and finally selecting 3 DPS for a Mega Flare stack indicated by this marker. The Mega Flare stack is a regular stack that selects a random DPS out of the 3 for a shared AoE. Stacking with said players without having a marker drastically increases the damage taken for the unmarked player. He will additionally target both healers and the remaining DPS without a Mega Flare marker for Earth Shakers. These will strike each marked player for a massive cone attack from Bahamut. The cones apply an Earth vulnerability and shouldn't be overlapped. They also leave behind a puddle that slows and kills you if you linger inside. Finally, 2 green tethers will attach to 2 random players. These are called Tempest Wings, and need to be picked up by the tanks. They are moderate tank busters and should not be overlapped with any other player. Should they hit another player, it will send them into the death wall. To resolve this, have the healers pre-position relative east and west. The DPS with Earthshaker should move out towards relative north, while the 3 DPS with Mega Flare stack will stack up relative south of Bahamut. The tank should wait for the stack to go off before picking up any Tempest Wing tether on the DPS, then position in front of the healers on Bahamut's hitbox. After the mechanic is resolved, Bahamut will use another Flare Breath and Flatten before casting Blackfire Trio and disappearing, starting the second big mechanic. The bosses will spawn in a triangle formation outside the arena, and you need to stack in the middle. Upon spawning, Bahamut will lock in on a player to dive. Twintania will start spinning liquid hell puddles on a random player in the party, and you need to start moving towards Nael without sprint. Nael will always be clockwise from Bahamut and counterclockwise from Twintania. After a brief moment, a random player will be targeted for a Thermionic Beam and Bahamut will dive. When the stack resolves, 4 Mega Flare towers will spawn on the intercardinals relative to Nael's position, and a healer, a tank, as well as 2 DPS will be selected for Mega Flare stacks. When the final liquid hell resolves, the DPS will split off to the left facing Nael and the rest to the right. To deal with this final part, the Mega Flare stacks will converge at the start of the puddles, and the other players will take towers. Tanks will prioritize the towers closest to Nael, and the healers will prioritize the ones further away. The DPS will simply jump to indicate which tower they are taking. While resolving the Mega Flare stacks and towers, Nael will throw out Hypernovas that will linger for a while. So make sure to wait for 2 outgoing Hypernovas before soaking your tower to make sure you don't cover the towers in death. Bahamut will reappear in the middle, cast a Giga Flare, then proceed to target the main threat for a triple Flare Breath before preparing Fellruin Trio. All 3 bosses will spawn in the middle in a triangle formation, and the party will want to look for Nael since she will be doing a triple quote mechanic. This quote can be one of 2 variants. It will either be Raven's Dive into Lunar Dynamo, then Meteor Stream, or Lunar Dynamo into Raven's Dive into Meteor Stream. Regardless of the pattern, the party will deal with 2 spreads and 1 donut AoE. While Nael is performing her quote mechanic, the party will also have to deal with Twintania's Etheric Profusion and Bahamut's 2 Tempest Wing Tethers. Identify Nael's quote to find out if it starts with Hallowed Moon or Descent, and resolve it accordingly. Use Twin and Bahamut's position as the new north, and use standard Quickmarch positions for spread. It is possible to have one healer stay in the Neuralink to make the spread easier. Regardless if Hallowed Moon is first or second, when it does happen, the party should stack tightly under Nael to make the tethers easy for the tanks to take. Since the tethers come from Bahamut, the tanks just have to stack together between the party and Bahamut to pick both up. Taking the tethers during the spread can be very risky. Twintania will next cast Etheric Profusion, which can only be survived by standing in a Neuralink. So the party will gather up in the Neuralink close to Nael, and each tank will take one of the other 2 closest to their spread position. Nael will finish off the mechanic with her Meteor Stream. The Tempest Wings will resolve at the same time as Etheric Profusion, so make sure the tanks are healthy. Also, have them use Sprint, the timing is tight if Dynamo is last. Bahamut will follow up with another raid-wide Gigaflare to end Fellruin Trio, followed by a Flare Breath into Flatten combo on the tank, and finally, another Flare Breath. The next mechanic is Heavensfall Trio, and will once again lead to Bahamut becoming untargetable after the cast finishes. The party will stack in the middle to bait incoming dives from a random spot around the arena. Much like in Quickmarch, this involves spreading to set positions, but the pattern looks a little different. In this case, Nael will not dive, and the other 2 will dive through the points in the middle. This will create different safe zones depending on where Nael is, and the pattern as well as positions will be as such. Both Twintania's and Bahamut's dives will lock in as soon as the markers appear, so move as soon as you see them. Just like in Quickmarch, when the dragons dive, twisters will spawn and you will have to rotate in towards the center of the arena. The next step involves Mega Flare puddles that you have to dodge. 8 randomly placed tower soaks at the edge of the arena, as well as the Heavensfall tower from Phase 2. To deal with this properly, dodge the puddles and get ready to count towers. Right players will count towers 1 to 4 clockwise from Nael, and the left players will do the same counterclockwise from Nael. A tower on Nael is always right 1. After you figure out which tower you need, line up to get knocked into it by the Heavensfall tower. You want to be in line with the waymarks to not take too much damage. After the towers have been soaked, 2 cone AoEs will be telegraphed from the Heavensfall tower. These gradually start to move clockwise or counterclockwise. One player gets targeted by a fireball stack, while Nael will throw out hypernovas on random players as before. To solve this, we will have the players identify where the first 2 cone AoEs are pointing and wait in between those 2. Once the direction has been exposed, the players should start circling in while chasing the AoE in front of them. Upon reaching the middle, and once the Heavensfall towers have disappeared, the fireball stack will resolve before Bahamut casts another Gigaflare. Bahamut will then proceed to cast a triple Flare Breath. During the upcoming Tenstrike trio cast, the party will want to pre-position in their Quickmarch positions using 4 as true north. Twintania will come down and target 3 players for 2 sets of generates, requiring the second set to be intercepted by 3 other players in place of the initial targets. At the same time, as the hatches happen, Nael will target all 8 players for Meteor Stream, hitting 1 player at a time. Have the first 3 targeted players take the closest Neuralink to their Quickmarch position and look out for any necessary adjustments to ensure that each player has 1 Neuralink. The remaining players should spread out to avoid overlapping Meteor Stream and jump to show they are planning on intercepting the Neuralink close to their position. Once the initial targets have soaked the first set, the player should move in a straight line to the wall, and the interceptor should take the player's position in the Neuralink. It is worth mentioning that the C Neuralink tends to drift. To mitigate this, the marked player should always move a tiny bit west since it never drifts to that side. Keep in mind that the hatches are AoEs, so steer clear of the explosions and make sure you don't overlap meteor streams when you move in to intercept. Everyone should return to the middle to make the next part easier. After the hatches have been successfully resolved, Bahamut will appear and target 4 players for Earthshaker markers. The remaining 4 players will want to group up on the 4 marker, showing which location they will take their upcoming Earthshaker to by positioning in the corners of the waymark. The first sets of Earthshakers should position themselves as far out as they possibly can to leave more space for the second set. Place them as such. Be ready to adjust for other Shakers. Once these go off, the players who just resolved their Earthshakers will move to the 4-way mark, and the second set of Earthshakers should be taken to the correct position in front of the puddles that have been dropped. Bahamut will once again finish up this trio with a Gigaflare into a Flatten, and finally a Flare Breath, before casting Grand Octet. This is the final active phase of Bahamut, so you should have brought him below 60% by now. Grand Octet is Nael dives taken to the extreme, and we'll start with Bahamut, Nael, and Twintania appearing at random spots outside the arena along with all 5 dragons from phase 2. It will start with Nael targeting a random player for a dive, and this locks in as soon as the marker appears. This is followed by all 5 dragons locking in random players for their own dives one at a time. These lock in when the markers disappear. Finally, Bahamut and then Twintania will both target players with their own dives that lock in when the marker appears. Each player will only get 1 dive each unless there are deaths. The dragons will dive in sequence clockwise from Bahamut if he is on an intercardinal, and counterclockwise from Bahamut if he is on a cardinal. The way this is meant to be done is to stack in the middle to bait Nael, then dodge your dive and start baiting the dragon dives in sequence towards Bahamut as they lock in. Then finally, bait Bahamut the same direction the other dragons dove. But Party Finder has settled for a strategy which involves less thinking. You will find Bahamut and then move to the opposite wall once Nael's dive marker appears. If Nael is directly opposite, you skip clockwise if Bahamut is on an intercardinal, or counterclockwise if he is on a cardinal. When Nael dives, you will run around the arena clockwise if Bahamut is on an intercardinal, and counterclockwise if he is on a cardinal. Keep track of if you get a dive marker or not, since it will be important for the final part. If Nael wasn't opposite Bahamut, making you skip a step at the start, you will use Sprint once the first dragon dives, and then move to the center of the arena when Bahamut's dive locks in. For the final part of Grand Octet, 4 towers will appear in random spots, and 2 DPS, a tank, as well as a healer will be targeted for a Mega Flare stack. Twintania will dive, and Twisters will lock in when the towers resolve. The person that didn't get a dive marker yet will move to the wall counterclockwise of Twintania to bait her dive. The players receiving a stack will be at the wall clockwise of Twintania, and the unmarked players will take towers. If the bait is not a Mega Flare stack, leave the tower the closest to them open for them to take. If they are a stack, simply shimmy clockwise after the bait. Party Finder likes to use tank LB3 here, if available, to remove fail states. If going this route, have a tank that isn't baiting Twintania use Limit Break when the towers appear, and have everyone that isn't baiting look for a tower to fill until they are all filled. Use Knockback Immunity to resist Twintania's dive if it goes wrong, and finally, move for Twisters when the towers resolve. When taking a tower, you can move in a circle to avoid stepping in a Twister when it resolves, and simply walk straight out when it connects.
Twintania and Nael will spawn north and after a few seconds become targetable, aggroing onto the tank that last had aggro on Bahamut, so make sure the tanks hold 1 each. You should keep them here whenever possible throughout the phase. The bosses will start off with Plummet and Bahamut's Claw on their respective targets. Following this, Twintania will start using Liquid Hell. These should preferably be baited by the same player from Twintania towards the back of the arena. 3 DPS players will be targeted for Hatch, while Twintania prepares Twisters for the party to dodge. To resolve this, the melees will always be assigned Neuralink A and B, the Liquid Beta gets C, and the caster flexes depending on what is available. If you are in Neuralink A or B, you should first soak your Generate before baiting Twisters. However, if you are in Neuralink C, you will have to first bait the Twister from the side before moving into Soak Your Hatch. Following the Generate plus Twister combo, the party will have to deal with the first triple quote from Nael. This can be either of these 4 combinations. Lunar Dynamo into Raven's Dive into Thermiotic Beam, Lunar Dynamo into Iron Chariot into Raven's Dive, Iron Chariot into Thermiotic Beam into Raven's Dive, or Iron Chariot into Raven's Dive into Thermiotic Beam. Party Finder's standard is to always stack for Thermiotic Beam on 4 if the quote starts with Lunar Dynamo, and on 1 if it starts with an Iron Chariot. For the spreads, you should be following the same rule using the Quickmarch positions. After the quotes is another set of twisters to dodge. Dodge in the direction of your Quickmarch position if possible. Nael will follow up with a Mega Flare, dealing raid-wide damage. Next up is Death Sentence and Raven's Beak, so tank swap and mitigate. After this point, the mechanics will repeat, starting with Plummet and Bahamut's Claw. There are a few things to note though. First off, Nael will always start her second set of quotes with an Iron Chariot variant out of the 4 if the first one was a Lunar Dynamo, and vice versa. Secondly, the order of Mega Flare and the final tank busters have been swapped. end, both bosses need to die at the same time or the one remaining will wipe the raid. You can make this easier by using a caster or ranged limit break to clean up the last health. Both of them need to die before Bahamut's gauge fills, else he will wipe the raid himself. Successfully killing both in time will trigger Bahamut killing all players with Terra Flare. However, Phoenix will come in and resurrect the party, granting everyone Phoenix's blessing, as well as a full limit break gauge. If Bahamut wasn't brought below 60% HP, this is where your run ends, since the next phase will be given a devastating damage up buff.
The phase will start with Bahamut casting Mourn Afar on a random target. This is a shared magical AoE that deals astronomical damage. This requires a hefty chunk of mitigation to survive, and it will happen 5 times throughout the phase. Party Finder has chosen to just use all DPS mitigation first, then tank and healer mitigation, followed by a tank limit break, then loop back to DPS cooldowns into finally burning everything you have left. The first 2 and the last 2 will naturally be mitigated with both reprisal and healer barriers. As a general rule of thumb, you will need 30% mitigation as well as healer barriers and full HP to live each stack. After Mourn Afar comes Akmorn. This is a shared magical tank buster that strikes the main threat 3 times, then adds an additional strike each time it's cast. This will happen 4 times, and PF defaults to sharing the first one with all tank mitigation, invulning the second and third, then sending all tank mitigation again for the final one. The last mechanic we need to discuss is Exaflares. This will launch a wall of moving AoE puddles in a random direction across the arena, originating from outside of it. They become visible around 60% into the cast. The puddles will move in pairs, and there will be gaps between the earlier and later ones. There are 2 main methods to dodge this, either at the wall where you slip behind the first set of puddles, or in the middle of the arena where you simply step behind the first set as it moves past. Regardless of which method you use, give up any uptime here if necessary and just focus on executing the mechanic safely. This phase is more or less just a nerve and mitigation check, and the boss should die as long as you all survive. Luckily, there are no twisters in this phase, so everything will be fine. At the end of the scripted mechanics, Bahamut will enrage with a continuous Mourn Afar on the highest threat, so spread out and send everything you have at him. You're burning with the Embers of Phoenix for the entire phase, dealing double damage, but dying will strip you of that blessing, so play safe and play for the clear. Good luck on prog, and congratulations on your new shiny weapons at the end.
I'm gonna sign out.
Wait, really? Wait, you're asking me to be a narrator for a UCOB guide? Wait, seriously? Me? Me? For real? Oh my fucking god, that would be an absolute bloody honor. Wow, thank you. Thank you so much for even considering it. Thank you so much.
Back community, and stay out in your light parties. Stay out in your light parties. Holy shit, guys, that's a letter. Oh, fuck.
Clockwise.
Oh no, Kicks, you're going the wrong way.
Where is the thing?
Chris!
Oh, crazy.
Oh my god. How did...
I'm fucking insane. I'm so good. I'm so good. I'm so good.
Where's the fucking bait? Where's the bait? Oh my fucking... Ah! Ah!
Spread. Stay away from that side, Thunder. You might get...
What do you...
Oh, I didn't see you because of the dragon wing.
Dragging these nuts across the floor, apparently!
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the guide. Until next time.